The police will tell you that a GPS glitch is just a minor inconvenience. They'll tell you that when a system recalculates, it's just looking for a faster route. But they weren't in the car with me on the night of October 14th. They didn't see the road that wasn't on the map, and they definitely didn't have to look into the eyes of whatever was waiting at the end of it. If your GPS ever tells you to take a sharp right onto an unmarked dirt road in the middle of a storm, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. It was just after midnight, and I was driving home from a late shift. The highway was completely dead, swallowed by a thick, heavy fog that the high beams couldn't pierce. I had about 2 hours left on the road, and the exhaustion was starting to settle into my bones. Then, the static started. My radio cut out first, replaced by a low, rhythmic buzzing sound. A second later, the smooth, robotic voice of my GPS cut through the silence. In 300 feet, turn right. I glanced down at the dashboard screen. The blue line indicating my route was gone. In its place was a blank black void with a single green arrow pointing into nothingness. I looked out the passenger window. There was a break in the guardrail, a narrow gravel path heading steeply down into a dense patch of Colorado woods. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the rain was turning into a torrential downpour, and a massive digital sign a mile back had warned of a mudslide blocking the main highway ahead. I thought the GPS was being smart. I thought it was saving me time. I turned the wheel. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as the car sloped downward, leaving the safety of the empty highway behind. Within minutes, the trees closed in around me like ribs. The road grew narrower and narrower until the branches of overgrown pine trees were scraping against my side mirrors. Screech! Screech! It sounded like fingernails on metal. I looked back at the GPS for reassurance. The screen was flickering violently now. The text at the top didn't say the name of a street anymore. It just read, "Arriving soon." After 3 miles of twisting through the dark, the road abruptly ended. My headlights illuminated a small clearing. In the center sat an old single-story cabin. The wood was black from decades of rotting in the damp forest air. The windows were dark, except for one on the far left, which cast a faint, flickering amber glow onto the mud outside. A single candle was burning on the sill. I put the car in park, leaving the engine running. I needed to turn around, but the path was too narrow for a 3-point turn. I was going to have to reverse all the way back up the mountain in total darkness. Just as I shifted into reverse, the GPS spoke again. The voice wasn't smooth anymore. It was choppy, distorted, and incredibly loud. "You have arrived." Then, my headlights completely died. The dashboard went black. The engine cut out. Total, suffocating silence took over the car, save for the heavy thumping of rain on the roof. I pumped the brakes, twisted the key, and slammed my hands on the wheel. Nothing. The battery was completely drained. I sat there in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled out my phone. No service. Emergency calls only. I looked back out at the cabin window. The candle on the sill was gone. A wave of pure adrenaline hit me. My eyes adjusted to the dark just in time to see the front door of the cabin slowly creak open. A figure stepped out onto the porch. It was tall, abnormally tall, maybe 6'6", and wearing a heavy yellow raincoat with the hood pulled low. It didn't move. It just stood on the porch, facing my car. Even though I couldn't see its face under the shadow of the hood, I knew with absolute certainty that it was staring directly through the windshield at me. Seconds felt like hours. I reached beneath my seat, my hand wrapping around a heavy metal flashlight. It was the only weapon I had. The figure took a step off the porch. Its movements were strange. It didn't walk smoothly. It lurked with a jerky, uncoordinated limp, its arms hanging limply at its sides. It started walking toward the front of my car. Step, step, step. I scrambled into the back seat, trying to put distance between myself and the windshield. I crouched low, pressing my back against the floorboards, praying the dark tint on the rear windows would hide me. Through the gap between the front seats, I watched the yellow raincoat reach the hood of my car. The figure placed two large, pale hands on the wet metal. Then, it leaned forward, pressing its face flat against the glass of the windshield. Because of the shadows, I couldn't make out its features, except for its eyes. They caught the faint glint of the moonlight. They were wide, unblinking, and entirely white. No pupils, no irises. Just two pale spheres locked onto the empty driver's seat. It stayed like that for a full minute, its breath fogging up the glass from the outside. Then, it realized the car was empty. The figure's head snapped sharply to the left, then to the right. It began to glide around the side of the car. I heard its fingers dragging across the wet paint. Slide. Slide. It reached the driver's side door. It grabbed the handle. Clack. 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 It jerked the handle aggressively, trying to force it open. Thank God the automatic locks had engaged when the power died. When the door didn't budge, the scraping started again, moving toward the rear window, right where I was hiding. I held my breath, squeezing my eyes shut. The scraping stopped right outside my ear. Then, a massive blow struck the glass. Boom! The heavy window spiderwebbed with cracks. It was trying to break its way in. I knew the next hit would shatter it completely. In a panic, I didn't think. I just reacted. I swung the heavy metal flashlight upward with everything I had, smashing it through the fractured glass, striking something soft and heavy on the other side. A horrific, high-pitched screech tore through the night sky. It didn't sound human. It sounded like metal grinding against metal. The weight left the side of the car. I opened my eyes and looked through the broken window. The figure in the yellow raincoat was stumbling backward into the mud, clutching its face. At that exact moment, like a miracle, the car's dashboard flared back to life. The headlights snapped on, blinding the creature. I dove over the center console into the driver's seat, slammed my foot on the gas, and threw the car into reverse. The tires spun wildly in the mud for a split second before gaining traction. I flew backward up the dirt road, reckless and terrified, tree branches tearing at the car as I sped away. In the rearview mirror, illuminated by the bright red glow of my taillights, I saw the figure standing in the middle of the road. It wasn't chasing me anymore. It was just standing there, waving a single, pale hand goodbye. I didn't stop driving until I hit a well-lit gas station 30 miles away. The police searched the area the next morning. They found the dirt road, and they even found the clearing. But there was no cabin. There were no tire tracks. There was nothing but an empty patch of woods and a pile of shattered automotive glass sitting in the mud. My car is fixed now, and I don't drive at night anymore. But every time I get into the driver's seat, I look at the dashboard screen with a knot in my stomach. Because sometimes, when the weather gets bad and the fog rolls in, the GPS still whispers to me, "In 300 feet, turn right." There's a stretch of Interstate 70 in eastern Utah where the gas stations completely vanish for about 60 miles. It's just flat, empty desert and massive rock formations that look like shadows in the night. Most people blast their music and speed right through it to get back to civilization. But if you're driving it past 2 a.m. and you see orange construction cones blocking the main lanes, look closely at the person waving the flashlight to redirect you. Because if they aren't wearing a reflective vest, You aren't being sent on a detour. You're being guided into a trap. I was moving across the country, driving a rented box truck packed with everything I owned. It was a Tuesday night, completely black, and my only company was the dull hum of the engine and the caffeine pills I'd been popping since Denver. Around 2:15 a.m., the smooth asphalt turned to rough gravel. Up ahead, bright orange construction signs began to flash. Road closed ahead. All traffic, detour left. I slowed the truck down. The highway was blocked off by heavy concrete barriers. Standing right next to the gap in the barriers was a construction worker. He was holding a glowing red traffic wand, slowly waving me toward a narrow, unlit access road that cut deep into the canyons. As I pulled closer, I rolled down my window to ask how long the detour would take. The man didn't look at me. He didn't even turn his head. He just kept his arm moving in that same rigid, robotic circle, pointing into the dark. I couldn't see his face under his hard hat, but something about the way he stood, perfectly stiff, completely ignoring the freezing desert wind, made the hairs on my arms stand up. I rolled the window back up and took the detour. The access road was pure dirt, kicking up massive clouds of dust that blinded my rearview mirrors. The canyon walls rose up on either side of me, blocking out the sky until it felt like I was driving through a subterranean tunnel. My headlights bounced violently as the truck hit pothole after pothole. 10 minutes in, I realized something terrifying. There were no other construction signs, no cones, no arrows telling me how to get back to the interstate. Just a single, endless dirt path winding deeper into the rocks. I decided to pull over and check the paper map I kept in the glove box, since my phone had lost signal an hour ago. I tapped the brakes, bringing the heavy truck to a stop. The dust cloud I'd been kicking up slowly caught up to me, enveloping the truck in a thick brown haze. As the dust began to settle in front of my headlights, I saw something standing in the middle of the road. About 50 yards ahead, a deer was standing perfectly still. But it wasn't right. It was sitting on its hind legs, its front hooves dangling limply in the air like a twisted caricature of a person. Its neck was bent at a sickening, unnatural angle, snapping sharply to the left, then to the right. My breath caught in my throat. I stared through the windshield, my hands locking onto the steering wheel. The deer slowly lowered itself onto all fours, but it didn't run away. It began to walk toward the truck. Its limbs moved completely out of sync, cracking and popping with every step, as if it was a creature that didn't quite understand how a four-legged body was supposed to function. I jammed the truck into reverse. The heavy transmission groaned, and the backup camera on my dashboard flared to life, showing the empty, dark dirt road behind me. But it wasn't empty anymore. Standing directly behind the rear door of my truck was the construction worker from the highway. He was still holding the glowing red traffic wand. Except now, he wasn't waving it. He was holding it perfectly still, pointing it right at my backup camera. I was trapped. A mangled, unnatural creature was walking toward my front bumper, and a silent, motionless man was blocking my escape from behind. Suddenly, the headlights went out. The sudden darkness was absolute. I was stuck in the pitch-black canyon, unable to see an inch in front of my face. Then, the truck shuddered. Thud. Something heavy had just jumped onto the hood of the truck. I shrank back into the driver's seat, pressing my weight against the door. Through the dark windshield, against the faint starlight, I saw a silhouette rise up. It was the deer, but its body was elongating, shifting, the skin stretching and tearing across its frame. It pressed its elongated, hairless face right against the glass. It didn't have animal eyes. It had human eyes, massive, bloodshot, and wide with a psychotic, manic energy. It began to slam its forehead against the glass. Bang! 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 At the exact same time, a frantic scratching started at the back of the truck. Screech! It sounded like metal claws ripping through the aluminum siding of my moving box, trying to peel the door open from the rear. The sheer terror turned into pure survival instinct. I didn't care if I wrecked the truck. I didn't care if I went off a cliff. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The front tires caught the dirt, and the truck lunged forward with a violent screech. The impact threw the creature off the hood. I heard it hit the dirt with a heavy, wet thud, followed by a screech that sounded like a woman screaming at the top of her lungs. I kept my foot pinned to the floor, driving blindly through the dark, relying entirely on the brief flashes of my high beams as they flickered violently on and off. I didn't look back. I crashed through bushes, bottomed out the truck on massive rocks, and drove purely on adrenaline for what felt like miles. Finally, the dirt road flattened out, and my headlights illuminated a glorious sight: the smooth, white-painted lines of the actual interstate. I blew right through a ditch, bottomed out the front bumper with a horrific crunch, and swerved onto the empty highway, accelerating until the speedometer hit 85. I didn't stop until I reached a massive, brightly lit truck stop in Utah. When I got out of the cab, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. I walked around to the front of the truck. The heavy metal hood was covered in deep, parallel gouges, and a patch of coarse gray fur was caught in the grille. But it was the back of the truck that made my blood run completely cold. The heavy rolling door at the rear was covered in bloody handprints, and tied tightly to the metal latch handle, slowly pulsing in the cool night air, was a single, cracked, orange construction worker's hard hat. If you drive for Uber or Lyft at night, you quickly learn to ignore the weird stuff. You ignore the drunk passengers crying in the back seat, the bizarre conversations, and the sketchy drop-off locations. You just want to hit your nightly quota and go home. But there's one rule every late-night driver should follow, no matter how much a fare is worth. If you accept a ride request in a secluded area and your passenger is already standing on the curb before you even pull up, check your app. Make sure the little icon matches exactly where they're standing. Because sometimes the app isn't the thing that summoned them. It was just after 3 a.m. on a freezing, rainy night in November. I was trying to finish up a grueling 12-hour shift, just needing one more ride to lock in a $75 weekend bonus. My phone buzzed. A ride request popped up. It was a 5-star passenger named Thomas. The pickup location was deep in an old historical residential district, an area famous for its massive Victorian-style homes and sprawling, overgrown oak trees. The payout was unusually high, so I swiped to accept it immediately. As I navigated through the winding cobblestone streets, the fog grew incredibly thick. The old street lamps cast a dull, yellow haze through the rain. I pulled up to the address, a massive, dark estate completely hidden behind a rusted iron fence. Standing right outside the iron gate, under the pouring rain, was a man. He was wearing a perfectly tailored, dark, three-piece suit. He didn't have an umbrella, but weirdly, the rain didn't seem to be bothering him. He was just standing there, his hands folded neatly in front of him, staring blankly down at the pavement. I pulled over to the curb and unlocked the doors. Click. The man moved instantly. He opened the rear passenger door, slid into the back seat, and closed the door with a quiet, solid thud. The interior of the car immediately turned freezing cold, the deep chill cutting right through my heavy winter jacket. "Heading to 412 Elm Street?" I asked, looking at him through the rearview mirror. The man didn't answer. He just gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. His face was incredibly pale, almost translucent in the dim dashboard light, and his eyes were completely bloodshot, staring straight ahead at the back of my headrest. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The ride was completely silent. Usually, passengers scroll on their phones, sigh, or look out the window. But this man didn't move a single muscle. He didn't blink. He just sat perfectly rigid in the center of the back seat, staring forward. I tried to break the ice. "Nasty weather out there tonight, huh?" Nothing. Total silence. I shrugged it off, assuming he was just tired or drunk. But as we got closer to the destination, my phone gave a loud, sharp error chime. I glanced down at the screen. The navigation map was completely frozen. A red text banner flashed across the top of the app. Searching for GPS signal. That was impossible. I was right in the middle of town. The signal should have been perfect. I tapped the screen to refresh it, but the app suddenly crashed completely, turning the phone screen pitch black. At that exact millisecond, my phone vibrated violently in my hand. A notification popped up from the Rideshare app. It wasn't a navigation update. It was a direct message from the rider. My heart did a slow, heavy thud in my chest as I read the words on the screen. The message was from Thomas. It read, "Hey, sorry, I'm running a few minutes late. I'm walking out to the gate right now. Are you almost here?" My breath completely froze. If Thomas was still at the house, who was sitting in my back seat? I slowly, meticulously raised my eyes to look at the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. I gasped, slamming on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a dead stop in the middle of the empty, foggy road. I whipped my head around, looking over my shoulder. The leather seat was completely bare, save for a pool of dark, freezing water puddling in the center of the cushion. I let out a shaky breath, a nervous laugh escaping my throat. I was hallucinating. I was exhausted. I'd been working too many hours. I turned back around to look at the road, reaching for my phone to cancel the ride and drive home. As my hand wrapped around the phone, I felt a freezing cold breath brush against the back of my neck. I looked into the rearview mirror again. The man was there, but he wasn't sitting down anymore. He was leaning entirely over the center console from the back seat, his face positioned mere inches behind my left ear. His features were horribly distorted now. His mouth was stretched open in an impossibly wide, silent grin, exposing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. His eyes were completely black, wide, and staring directly into mine through the glass of the mirror. "Don't stop driving," he whispered. The voice didn't sound like it came from his mouth. It sounded like it was echoing inside my own head, accompanied by a deafening, high-pitched, static scream. Panic took over completely. I didn't think about the app, the bonus, or the car. I threw the door open, unbuckled my seatbelt, and dove out of the moving vehicle onto the wet, hard asphalt. I tumbled into the street, scraping my hands and knees violently. I scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, sprinting toward the bright neon lights of a 24-hour diner a block away. I burst through the diner doors, soaking wet and screaming for help. The cook behind the counter immediately called the police. When the officers arrived and drove me back to my car, they found it sitting idling against a concrete light pole. The front bumper was crumpled and the engine was smoking. The police searched the vehicle. They found no one inside. But when they checked the interior cabin, the officer pointed his flashlight at the windshield. The entire inside of the glass was covered in thick, icy frost, despite the car's heater being blasted on full. And written clearly in the frost from the inside of the car were 4 simple words: "Thanks for the ride." I deleted my driver account that night. I took a factory job that keeps me indoors under bright fluorescent lights surrounded by people. But every time my phone vibrates in my pocket, or I hear the soft chime of a text notification, my heart skips a beat, because I can't help but wonder if it's a passenger waiting for me in the dark.